Hello, everyone, and a very good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. So, today we are on the session 2 for our AWS Solutions Architect Associate Level Certification Bootcamp, and this is week 1. Yesterday we had our introduction to cloud and AWS, and today we are starting off with S3 over the next 1 hour. So we do have sessions coming up next week as well, which we will let you know in a short while. But right now, let's go ahead and get started. And we have Sanchit, who's going to give us a deep dive on S3. Sanchit?
Cool. Thanks, Fazil, for that warm welcome. Thank you, everyone, for making out some time from your weekend to join us and explore this bootcamp. Uh, I'll ensure that I don't make it more of theoretical for you and have backed by a couple of good demos and ensure that this 1 hour is really interesting and more learning for you guys and as well as informative. So I think let's go ahead with it. So today's we'll be focusing on Amazon S3. We'll be doing a deep dive on Amazon S3, a service which is very renowned, well versed. Anyone who's looking forward to start with AWS cloud journey, first service will always look forward is S3, right? So let's look forward to it. Before we start with the S3 in detail, I just want to recall a couple of things. We will be sharing a link, a kind of a link, which will help you to register with us so we can share any materials, any information. We'll create a kind of a platform so you can chat with us, you can clear any of your doubts. So please do register with us on that link. So you can enroll this and we can pass on any information and onboard you to all the required platforms. That's one, as well as AWS also has a reskill as a platform via which there is a study groups created for all the associate certification. You can enroll there, you can talk about, collaborate, and have this wonderful experience for getting this certification. So please enroll to both of this link. The links will be given in the chat for this video. With that, let's start with today's session. We will be focusing on first on the recap of the last session. So yesterday we had in the morning introduction to cloud computing and AWS. I'll quickly run through what exactly we had covered up in that session. Then we'll focus on today's main agenda, which is deep dive into S3, and then we'll talk about the next steps, what we have next for you after the session. So with that, let me go ahead and quickly give my introduction. In a second, my name is Sanchit. I work as a lead architect at Quantify, an AWS API ambassador, very active on all the social media platforms, LinkedIn, GitHub, Twitter. You can reach out to me any of those platforms. I'll be happy to solve or help you, assist you in any of your queries, which may be career related, certification related, or anything. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'll help you with any of those your questions. With that, let's recap what we have learned in the last session. We understood what exactly is cloud computing, why it is boom in the market. It provides you the kind of scale, the kind of resources in a shorter time span connected via internet. You don't have to pay any upfront, and it's meant for all the targeted audience, right from kids and schools to kind of an experts enterprise use case kind of stuff. It supports all those stuff, and this in one nutshell, cloud computing is made of different features and functionalities like disaster mitigation, internet access, shared resource pooling on demand, self-service capability, optimal use of services, elasticity, and metered services, which is pay-as-you-go model, right? So those are the different features why cloud computing is very renowned in the market. Along with that, it offers deployment model, which is like public cloud, hybrid cloud, and private cloud, as well as the services like infrastructure as a host, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, right? So those are the three different models which are provided by AWS when it provided by the cloud computing. So this is in nutshell what we explored. We went in depth about across the features as well as deployment model and service model. That was one. Second, then we jump on and we explore the introduction to AWS. We understood AWS falls into the public cloud deployment model of cloud computing. It has been like split into, from a network perspective, it has a very massive global footprint, as well as each of the geographical is split like a region. Each region has availability zones, two or more availability zones, and each availability zone has two data centers which are geographically segregated to ensure it's not very proximity, it has some geographical distance to ensure if there is any sorts of problems like natural calamities or any sorts of downtime, it's not affected to the another availability zone, and this way you can function in a given region, right? So we learn across different definitions of what is region, availability zone, what is local zones, point of contact, all those stuff we learn about in last session, as well as we did a quick recap about how exactly the entire different services provided by AWS can be split across different things, which is like the infrastructure section, foundational services, platform services, and at the top what you have the application, right? And as I mentioned, today onwards in all the sessions we'll try to deep dive in each of these different pillars what we have, whether we talk about the foundational services, whether we talk about the platform services, we'll go in each of these services and we'll try to explore what exactly these services are, what are their features and functionality. So that's what we learned in our last session. This was a very quick summary in few minutes. I would highly request you in the same, please register with us. If you guys haven't got missed yesterday's lecture, we will share the link of the recording, which will help you to revisit, understand in detail. That will help you to explore the other services very easily. Now, I'll focus on today's quick session, right, which is around deep dive on Amazon S3. Before we start exploring the features and functionality, let me quickly go ahead. What exactly in S3, right? S3 is the main building block. Any services, what you talk about, whether you're talking about software as a service, which is like Comprehend, Medical, or any API-based services like Chime and all, or you talk about any platform as a services. AWS S3 is the fundamental building block of AWS. Most of all the services rely on S3 for storage, right? Storage of logs, storage of any files, storage of any data. S3 becomes a kind of a founding or foundational building block for all the services, right? That's is a key thumb rule about the S3. Second, it provides you infinite scaling, right? So technically what AWS promotes is S3 is infinite scaling. That is exactly true, right? You can store up to terabytes, petabytes of data easily on S3 without any sorts of problem. It's highly scalable and concurrent, right? Not only just uploading the data, even if you want to download that data, it's the performance is that exact the same, right? And again, the thumb rule what we understood, right? Any services of AWS is pay as you go model, that however or how much storage you consume, that's what you have to pay for it. Let's say you consume 1 KB as of today, tomorrow you consume 1 MB, day after tomorrow you consume 1 GB. So that's the same what you pay, and the service rates get cheaper as the storage increases, right? So if you see the data which you store in terabytes and petabytes, the kind of offering, the kind of discounts which you get on that larger volume is much more as the volume increases, right? So that's about the two things when anyone talks about S3. It's infinite scaling, foundational building block for all the services, which provide with pay-as-you-go kind of a service model. That's about the S3. Now let's understand how exactly S3 stores the object, right? So in case, when we talk about S3, there are two things which are two basic concepts which are always referred as bucket and objects. Now, very simple of what you can refer is bucket in a normal language, in your local language of we talk about in a desktop is the directory. You create a directory, right, to organize your content. Similarly, in directory in S3 is called as bucket. Any files, which can be any images, any documents, any kinds of bit or any kinds of files, exe files we talk about. That files in S3, it is referred as an object. So S3 is an object-based storage. Do remember that anything in S3 which is stored is called as an object, right? Technically in layman language, that's called as file, but it is an object-based storage. So, and by default, whatever you store in S3 is private. As we talk about the shared responsibility yesterday, by default, Amazon always recommend you store private. That means any data which you store in S3 bucket is accessible within yourself or group of people who have the access, or your company whose account you have leveraged for storing or creating the bucket. It should be only accessible to the limited pool of people, not entire world, what kind of data you have stored around it, right? So two things, S3 is made up of bucket and object. By default, bucket and object are private in nature. You have to explicitly make them public. If there are any sorts of use case and all, we will learn in upcoming slide which are those use cases when you have to make public, in what circumstance. So far, I think you guys will be clear. And then the last point is you can do more advanced orchestration of workflows and all by catching the events. So anything which you do, right, in S3, whether you upload a file, whether you get a file, whether you delete a file, copy, paste, move, those all different operations what you can do, right, or rename. Whenever you do any action, there is an event that is associated, right? As I mentioned in the last, that in Amazon, one of the best thing is whatever or any action you do across any services, all those get tracked in a form of an event, either in CloudTrail or CloudWatch, right? Based on the kind of operation. When you, as I mentioned, in a form of an event, it get tracked, right? So event is generated of any action which you do, and that event you can capture, and you can just fan out that event across various other services. Like you can send SNS notification, you can put it into queue for processing, you can put it into Lambda function, or you can trigger any sorts of other event bridge, those kinds of stuff, right? At no cost. So the use case can be, let's say you get a file and you want to send a thank you message to the person who uploaded the file, right? Now you cannot keep watching it that, okay, hey, did my file got into the S3 bucket? Did my file got into the S bucket, right? It can be mid of night. So what you can do is you can automatically capture or deploy an event notification that as soon as you get a file, there is an event notification is generated, which triggers a Lambda, and Lambda sends a email or notification which you want to send, right? There are many other sophisticated use cases what you can do, but example, you can think of it that whenever you receive any object, any operation, you can just simply send or generate an event off of it. So that's about S3 overview. Let's quickly move towards the bucket. So bucket are defined at regional level. So for example, when you're creating the buckets are defined at the regional level. Like it can be in Mumbai region, it can be, let's say, North Virginia region or Ohio. But the naming of the bucket has to be globally unique. It cannot be that, okay, the bucket name, what you create, let's say for an example, 1, 2, 3, 4, that has to be unique within India, within Mumbai region. No, it has to be globally unique, but the bucket will be defined, the data will be stored within India region or Mumbai region, right? So do remember that. That's a very confusing thing. Most of the people always miss that point, right? And it's a very common question also asked by in the interviews or the certifications. That's one. Second, the naming convention. So when it comes to the naming convention part of it, bucket naming convention can be no upper score, like you have to be all lowercase, no underscore, you can use hyphen. It has to be minimum 3 to 63 characters long. You cannot use things like IP addresses, and must start with a lowercase letter or a number, right? So the first character has to be a lowercase letter or a number. It cannot start with a special character. So these are the things what you have to remember when you're naming a bucket, as well as you have to ensure that the bucket name has to be globally unique. If you don't have a globally unique, for sure when you're creating the bucket, you will get an error around it. So that's about the bucket. And as we understood in the previous slide, in a simple words, bucket is nothing but a directory, what we refer in a normal language. Similarly, objects, what we refer as is like any sorts of files, which is structured, unstructured, images, PDF, document, anything is in S3 world, it's referred as an object. Now, object is requested or identified by a key. Key is nothing like a tag, right? The location, what we refer in when you're looking in any of the files in your machine, in your desktop, right? You always look up from a file that under directory, then you have a location, C drive :XYZ :XYZ, right? So that kind of location what you have. Similarly, in S3 also is the same concept. There is a bucket. Within that bucket, you have different location. That location is made up of prefix. Prefix are nothing but some nested folders. And then you have an object name. That entire path is called as a key. Excluding bucket name, that entire path is called as a key that is used to uniquely identify your object. Now, there are other variants are also there. If you have versioning and all those things enabled, we'll learn what is that. You will see that version parameter along with prefix and object name help you to uniquely look up the object. So it depends around it, but in generally, it's prefix plus object name will help you to identify any of your files uniquely within that given bucket. So do remember, this is how your path will look like where your file will be stored. Again, this my folder, another folder, this can be like n numbers of listed folders what you can have, how you're organizing it, your S3 bucket. But generally, this whatever folders you have, hierarchy or folders, this all will be referred as prefix. The object name will be referred as, the last file name dot extension will be referred as object name, and this total will be referred as your key. And then you can have different metadata, tags, key, those other kinds of stuff to object, right? Whenever you store any file, for sure in Windows also or other operating system, you can tag, you can annotate that object, right? The file, not the content of the file, but the file label itself you can annotate, you can tag. Similarly, what you can do in AS3 also, there's a key, there is a value, metadata about it, version ID, versioning enable, and other access control information for security. So those kinds of other information get tagged on the object which you store in S3. High levelly, when you talk about S3, there are two kinds of metadata. What is there? One is the system metadata. Now, system metadata can be anything like version ID, access control information, storage class, like anything which S3 self provide to the object by default. Whatever any object you upload, by default, which S3 provides is called as system metadata. Certain times we also tag the object to uniquely classify or operate it in a different fashion, right? Or to filter it out. That is called as user defined meta type, which you can easily identify by this prefix. Generally in S3 it's key and a value, right? So that key will have this particular character, right? This entire string it will have xamz meta. That means this is user defined meta is there, and then there will be a corresponding value around it. Object metadata cannot be modified, right? So this is talking about the user defined metadata cannot be identified when the object is already stored, right? So let's say the object is already stored in S3 and you want to modify the metadata, that's not possible unless you fire one more request on top of it to put again, to override, to copy, or to put, then you can upload it. But ideally at rest, when the bucket object is already at rest in S3, you cannot change the metadata of it, and each object can be up to 5 terabytes, right? So that's very good, right? I mean, 5 terabytes, one file I haven't seen. Generally we chunk, right? Even if you talk about big data, you will chunk those objects into smaller chunk, and then you upload it. So at a max, one object can be of 5 terabytes. This way you can easily scale up to petabytes of data, and you can store into S3 without any sorts of problem. Moving towards the next, versioning, right? For sure, we'll cover all this demo in a while, but versioning is like what we can say is a backup, right? Is used for backup, copy, replicas, what we refer in a normal language, right? That what you always create whenever you're creating any document, any sorts of presentation, or any sorts of backup, right? You create different copies of it. So if one is lost, you have second of it, second is lost, third of it, right? That's exactly the same concept of versioning. Versioning is like you make different copies in that same folder, same bucket. So in case if something incidentally get deleted, you have one more copy of it, which can be used to restore, which can be used to refer if required, right? If something goes wrong with the original copy, you can look around it. As well as it is not replicated as versioning, because you can go back into history, right? Like how generally we do in the code repository. You can go back to weeks and months, and you can identify how exactly the object got changed over a period of time, like who made the changes in the code base and all. Similarly, in versioning, not only the backup, but you can go back, you can see what different versions date wise you had, which is the latest version, and you can try to go back in the history and see what was the object. And even if you want to restore, you can easily restore that. So that's why it's not only just help you to replicate or create multiple copies, but as well as track the different versions with help of version ID. That way, it is easy for you to go back in history and restore or do whatever things kind of backup or what you want to do around that, right? One important thing which you always need to look forward from versioning is the cost, right? So what numbers of copy, like you have 10, 15 or 20 copies of data, you're going to pay the bill not for one object, you're going to pay the bill for all the 20 objects, because 20 different versions of are being stored. So please ensure that you have proper rules or actions defined, that after a certain period of time, let's say after 2 months, 3 months, when you don't need that data, you start purging out or deleting the old versions of data. So this way you're only paying the cost of the required data, not the stale data, which is just accumulating in form of versioning, right? That's very important of it. And at the last, if you're having any sorts of cross-region replication, as we said, right, versioning also provides replication around it, right? you need to ensure that versioning is enabled on both the buckets, the source as well as destination, which we will learn that how exactly needs to be enabled and all, but it's going to provide around both. And at the last, any for object which was there in the S3 bucket before even the versioning was applied will have the version ID as null, that this will identify that this copy does not have the versioning, and all the copies which has the version ID, that means this was created as a part of versioning. So don't get confused whenever you look a bucket. It might be possible the versioning was enabled later, so you might see there are a couple of objects which has version ID as null. And at the last, let's say reverse. If you suspend the versioning, right? If you, let's say you said I don't need versioning anymore, then all the copies which are there in bucket as a part of versioning will stay as it is. Even the versioned copy will stay as it is. The new data will not have the version ID. So don't get confused. For the first time when you're enabling the version, there might be a couple of copies which have the version ID as null. That means these are the old data without versioning. As well as when you suspend the versioning on the bucket, you will see there are certain copies which has multiple versions because previously the versioning was enabled on this bucket. And last thing is, versioning always is enabled on the bucket level. It's not enabled on a specific folder or prefix, right? It will be on the all of the bucket. So do ensure that you either segregate the right data or filter it out into a separate bucket and then only create the versioning on the objects in a separate buckets which required, because it's going to be on the bucket level. So it might be possible it start creating the versioning for a very larger files which can be easily regenerated, and you don't need the versioning for it. So I would say, let me stop sharing my screen and let me quickly jump to the AWS console. Okay, so I'm at my AWS console. What I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to go to S3 and we'll do a kind of a quick lab here, like a simple lab, how to create an S3 bucket, how to put up load object and those kinds of stuff. So in case if you are very new to the S3 or AWS, it is easy for you to go and try and play around a bit with the console, right? So this is the console of S3. Next what I'm going to do is, as I mentioned, right, the bucket name has to be uniquely global, globally unique. But there is a AWS region, what you can see. So each bucket is deployed in a specific region, but the naming has to be globally unique. And then there are access around the security, like what permission do you have on the bucket, and then the creation date of it for a tracking perspective. Okay, now what I'll do is quickly create a new bucket. So you have to click on the create new bucket. Please ensure you have to give it a very unique name. So this is how you create the bucket. You specify whichever region you want to do it, right? Do ensure that you select, again, the same concept what we learned yesterday. When you're selecting a region, please ensure three things: compliances, which is regulatory ask, where is your customer located, what kind of features or services are available in the region. If based on three things, you select your AWS region, right? Whichever or whatever enterprise application you're building on or a POC demo, please ensure based on these three things, you select the AWS region, which applies to S3 also. Then you give the kinds of security, like the access control list, like who should be have the access and other stuff. This ensures, as I mentioned yesterday also, right, it has to be, security has to be the prime focus, that you don't have any sorts of bridge around it. So here we ensure, we say that, okay, this bucket has restricted all kinds of public access, which can be read, write, update, modify, any kind of accesses are not given on this bucket, and you block in one single click. Then here you can enable the version. We will enable the versioning here. Or what I'll do is I'll just click as it is for now and create bucket, okay? So the bucket is created and you can see that this bucket is created. Now, if someone is already on AWS console, they try in any of the region, if they try to take the same name, my AWS session -s3-demo, you will see this bucket name is not globally unique. Any of the regions, any of the account, whatever you try, it will get an error to you. What I'll do is I'll quickly upload, click on this upload. You can add a folder, you can add a file. This is very simple, I would say. And you can just select, let's say I'm uploading the CSV file. Now you can just provide the different permissions, different property, which will keep as is. And this is currently uploading. So the upload is done. And you can see you have created the bucket, you have created the object. This is very simple, right? This is how what you create the bucket and create the object. What we'll do next, we will enable the versioning on this bucket. So what you have to do is go under properties, bucket versioning, and enable bucket versioning. And you click save. Now I'll show you that, whatever the note which I mentioned, right, about the null version ID. So this is the data. If I just click on this, you will see the version ID is null. That is because I uploaded this object before I enable the versioning. That's why the version ID is null. Now, if I do the same thing, right, I don't even need to upload another one. I'm copying this CSV file, right? So let's say I'll upload another one, add file, and I'll upload the same file again, same data.csv, and I'll upload it. Okay. Now, when I go to the version, you will see there's a version created for it. See, this is a version created. As you start uploading the same file, it has clearly identified that this was the version, this was the old version, this is a new version, this was with the null one, and this is the latest one. As you keep overwriting the same file name, same object, you will see the version get increased here, right? So that's about what we learned so far, how to create bucket, how to upload an object, and how to enable the version. Next, what I will do is we will go and explore something called as replications. So for replication, first let's understand what exactly is the replications, right? So as you see, the version will incrementally overwrite, which is like another unique identifier. You will get it, and you can restore, you can delete the old version, and you can take care. And as we just saw, any file that was not versioned, that was there in S3 before the versioning was done, will have the version ID as null. Next, let's understand the replication. Replication is the same backup. In simple words, what we call about backup, right? You have an S3 bucket. You want to ensure that the data sitting in this S3 bucket also get replicated to another bucket in same account, same region, or another bucket in another region. So that is called as cross region, which means another region, right? Bucket in another region. Same region means, as the name suggests, bucket in same region. You can perform both kinds of replication within another region, same region, and bucket can also be across different account. That doesn't mean, let's say, for example, I'm using AP South in my account. I have my company account also. I can also use a bucket in AP South that will be same region. It can be also that in my same account, I can have one bucket in North Virginia, one bucket in AP South, which is Mumbai. That even though is the same account called as cross region, right? So account has nothing to do. It's based on the region where you're trying to access. Do remember that. So replication is what you can have the cross region, same region, and bucket name can be also, buckets can also be in different account. Copy is asynchronized, right? So within 15 minutes of time frame, you will see your objects will get replicated. It's not very real time or spontaneous, right? Even though if you upload a file, it will take its own time to replicate that file into the destination bucket. And then you can give proper IAM permission to do S3. And with case of CRR cross region, you can have compliances, low latency, and cross region. SRR, which is like same region replication, the use cases are log aggregation, live replications, and other stuff, right? The majorly people generally uses cross region replication in terms of to have a backup in form of a disaster recovery, right? When you're working on something, something goes wrong, you need another copy quickly. That way, people can have it from another bucket in another region, right? So cross region is mostly even used for backup or compliances or low latency kind of stuff, right? So that's about the cross region replication. One of the important thing which we learned in the previous slide, which was related to replication, was in order to enable replication, which is cross region or same region, you need to have versioning enabled on both the buckets. The versioning needs to be enabled on the source bucket as well as on the destination bucket. If you don't have the versioning enabled, this is going to throw an error for it, right? So do remember about the S3 replication on that front. Moving towards the next, encryption. This is a very important topic, I would say, from use case when you're working in real life enterprise level. There exactly it will help you out, as well as from a certification perspective, it is very important. S3 supports encryption. In general, there are two types of encryptions are there. One is the server side encryption and the client side encryption. These are the methods around it. And encryption is done on two ways. One, the object is at rest. The object is stored at somewhere. At that time, this encryption is done. Or when the object is under transit, it is moving from one place to another, right? Communication. So there you do it as called as data in transit. So in data in transit also you can do encryption in transit, encryption at rest, and then at encryption at rest there are multiple options are there. So if we quickly look here in this chart, S3 encryption are of two types. In flight, which is nothing but in transit. At rest is when the object is already there stored in S3. Then at rest, there are two types, right? And then for an in-flight, in transit, you can have SSL or TLS. There are different ways you can have those kinds of encryption. At rest, there are two types again: client side, server side. In client side, client means me, you, any of your companies, your team who is working around, right? So client side encryption, you are fully responsible. You are responsible for encrypting, you are responsible for decrypting, you are responsible for managing the encryption keys, right? So that becomes very simple for AWS, but for us, it's very difficult because you have to write the code, you have to manage the keys, you have to decrypt the code. So those kinds of becomes an overhead when you're writing any sorts of code or when you're building any system around it. So that's why there is something called a server side. That means why I should take care of it, why cannot AWS take care of it, or in simple words, why cannot Amazon S3 takes care of it. So that means server side, Amazon S3 side. There are three options there. You can have server-side encryption S3, server-side encryption KMS, server-side encryption customer, right? These are the three other options which is provided by Amazon S3 based on how exactly the keys are managed, right? The encryption keys are managed. In case of S3, S3 is responsible for managing the keys. You don't have to worry about it. So not only just encryption, description, but even managing the keys is fully taken care by S3. In case of second option, which is SSE KMS, which is key management service, AWS also provides KMS as a service. So encryption, decryption, key management is responsible of KMS. Whereas in the last, SSE-C, which is the customer is responsible for managing the keys. AWS doesn't even store the keys at their end. Customer is responsible. They will take care of the encryption and other details, right? With the public key. So that's about based on how the customer keys are managed. There are three options that are available on the server side, right? And again, the whole idea is on the client side, there is no right or wrong. You can do client side also, you can do server side. It depends on how sensitive your data is and how exactly you want to protect. Even certain times, most of the people uses server side encryption with SSE KMS or SSE C. SSE C, they are pretty sure because the keys are with them and encryption is taken care by S3 with the public key. So they also use SSE C, and certain times they also use SSE S3 because that's a default mechanism. You don't have to care about anything. You just have your object very safe and secure. So this is the zoom in view of four of the options, which is server side and the client side, how exactly things look like, right? So if we go in detail from left top, there is an object via HTTPS header. S3 takes care of this object as well as key, which is by S3, and then encrypt and store into the bucket, right? So from a client perspective, you're doing nothing. You're just firing the same put option. S3 takes care of everything. So that is SSE S3. If we talk about SSE KMS, it's the same concept, right? Instead of S3, you will see customer CMK is there, right? Customer manage key is provided by KMS. The rest of the remains the same. As a customer, you don't have to worry about it. You have to just configure KMS and then rest will be taken care of it. So those are the first two options. If you go on the second row, SSEC, which is a customer, you're not only providing the object, you're also providing the key for the encryption, right? The client side key along with as an HTTP header that AWS uses and perform the encryption on it. So that is where, as I mentioned, the difference you will see in terms of the keys which is used for encryption around it. So here you can see the customer key is being used. And at the last, the entire encryption, the key management, everything is being done by the client side. However you perform and encrypt it, you just only have to, S3 is only used as a form of a storage where you store your encryptor storage, right? Neither AWS holds, now neither Amazon holds any of your keys, nor they know about what algorithm you have used for encryption. They will just store this as a black box package at Amazon S3, right? But the entire encryption, decryption, key management is done by the client. So here are the 4 different options what you can get across, highly categorized as client-side encryption, server-side encryption, and then there are 3 around it, 3 objects around it. So that's about more around server-side encryption. And again, please note this out. This is very important topic for any associate certification, for any industry use case. Encryption is must needs to be enabled if you have sensitive data, or even if you don't have any sensitive data, encryption should be there. Next to the bucket policy, right? So as we talk about the access control list when we went on the AWS console, bucket policy is similar like a policy which you put into bucket that can allow any sorts of interaction or action on the bucket. Like for example, as given a sample here, right? You're giving all S3 get object permission on this particular bucket, right? So bucket for policies is very important to define all those kinds of stuff, right? Like specifically what you have given S3 colon get object. Similarly, you can give a list of actions or you can give a star to allow all the actions on a specific bucket, on all the buckets. That kind of permission you can do. Please watch out. You should not like give to all the, S3 colon star, which means all the actions or all the buckets, right? This has to work something called as list privilege access, where you only provide very bare minimum required, even though certain times like when we'll be hosting a static website, you have to end up giving the bucket permission. Please ensure that you give it only specific to S3 get object, not to everything of it, right? So you have to be very cautious when you're playing around or working on the bucket policy. And similarly, it's not just imply on allow, you can also deny any operation in S3, right? So deny always holds a higher precedency compared to allow. What that means is, let's say you have a bucket policy which has 2 sets, right? One is saying you allow get and put. Let's say second is saying you deny put. So first, deny will hold a higher precedency and you will not able to perform a put operation, but you will easily allow to do a get operation on it, right? Even though allow is defined first compared to deny. So deny always holds a higher precedency around it. So please ensure that stuff. Again, you can use multiple other things, not only just the access control, who should have what kind of access and all. You can also put certain guidelines right around it. Let's say, for example, as I was talking about, encryption is must in the previous line. You can, via bucket policy, you can enforce that at least bare minimum people should have S3 default, which is S3 SSE S3 should be enabled. Otherwise, you do not allow people to upload the object, right? Which becomes very important. If you want to secure the data in S3 bucket, you can enforce certain kinds of guidelines or restriction also. And again, that's from a security perspective as well as from a use case perspective. You can do other things like you can grant the access to a bucket in another account. If you want to put that data or do a data transfer or access it, you can do that kind of other mechanism also via bucket policy. You can give a cross account. So you not only can allow or deny any sorts of sets of APIs, you can also enforce certain guidelines or recommendation, as well as you can allow other buckets in another region also to access. So that's about bucket policy. Moving towards the next, which is the S3 static website, right? So in case of S3 static website, generally we use websites, right? Previously it was done in PHP. Now you talk about there are Angular, React, servlets. There are many other ways where you can write the website, you can code, you can deploy, right, on Tomcat, Apache server, those kinds of different things you can do. You can also host your static simple websites on S3 without worrying about your infrastructure, without worrying about your scalability, right? And that can easily scales up to millions and billions of users, right? You don't have to worry about anything kind of stuff. But the only restriction is this applies to static websites only. If you have any dynamic content like PHP, .NET, it won't suffice, right? It can only do the static kind of thing. And again, the principle remains the same. As I mentioned in S3 introduction, it can scale up to millions and billions of people. Similarly, S3 website is hosted on that same infra, so it can also scale. As well as you can also give a friendly name on the S3 bucket, right? Generally, how do we have Amazon.in or xyz.example.com, those kinds of friendly URL. Similarly, with help of domain service of Amazon Route 53, you can also give a friendly name on your S3 bucket with respect to your company and those kinds of stuff, right? Company website are normally static in nature, so you can host on S3 and you can give a friendly name on top of it, and you don't have to worry about any infrastructure there, right? The website URL, I mean, as I mentioned now, you can store a static website on S3, but what will be the URL of it? How the URL will look like, right? So there are two ways this URL look like: bucket name colon S3 hyphen website hyphen AWS region dot amazonaws.com. There's only small difference between the first and the second, between the website and the region. So if you see in the first, there is an hyphen here, website hyphen AWS region. Here it's a dotted annotation. So S3 hyphen website dot region. So this is a small difference, but there's two ways you can have the website URL, and on top of it, you can have domain service to make it more friendly. The common question which generally people face is when they don't apply proper cross origin request, or they don't apply the right bucket permission, they generally get a 403 forbidden error. So wherever you see in your questions or you see in your real examples, right, real experience, whenever you're hosting a static website, you're getting a 403. Simplest solution is two things: check for bucket policy, one; two, check for the cross resource request. These are the two things which you need to resolve this 403. So bucket permission, bucket policy in terms of does it have the public RAID kind of stuff, right? So these are the basic thing about S3 website. What we'll do is we'll simply go ahead in the console and we'll enable a kind of a public website. So this is my bucket which I have created. I'll close this. There are three pages what I've already have: index.html, error page.html, error.html, and sample.html. I've already uploaded this file. I'll go into the properties. Under properties, you will see that first in the static website, you have to edit and enable this, right? Then you have to host a static website, or you just need a kind of a mechanism to redirect the request for an object, right? Like generally we get that 301, 302, you ping something and then you get redirect or taken to another website, that kind of stuff you want to do. Then you define what is your index page, what is your error page. In case if you're using for redirect, you can also define the rule that, okay, if someone comes to this particular page, then you redirect to the home page. If someone comes to this particular, let's say via this particular protocol, you redirect to that. Those kinds of additional thing what you can do here, right? Once it is done, you can save this. So first step, you have to enable the bucket. You have to enable the static website in that stuff, right? Second, you have to go to the permission and you have to make the bucket public. So initially, as I told you, right, that you have to ensure that there are certain examples where you have to make the bucket public. This is one of them. You have to make the bucket public. So you have to go here, you have to define the permission. Do ensure, as I mentioned earlier also, give it to very least privilege what's required, right? So this is the bucket policy where you have effect. This is the name of it, where you have effect, principal, action, and resources. So you define the bucket policy here and ensure this bucket policy is telling that anyone in this world will have the permission of get object on this particular bucket and the resources stored within that. So if you specify up to this, that means the bucket slash star means any object, regular expression, any object within that public, within that bucket anyone from the world can perform the get operation. That means I'm making this publicly readable in a normal language, right? As you can see from here also, public read get object. That's step 2. First, upload the code, enable the static website. Second, you apply the bucket policy, right? And now if you hit the kind of an URL, one sec. Okay, so this is my URL. I'll copy this URL. Still, you're looking into the 403 forbidden error, right? As I mentioned in my presentation also, if you're getting this 403 forbidden error, that means something is still wrong with the bucket. So the thing which is still wrong is your bucket is still not public, because here you have blocked the public access, which is a bucket level setting. Even though you have given a policy which is apply and which has made all the objects as public, but your bucket is still private, right? So it's like you lock your folder and you allow all the public access to your files. Doesn't make sense, right? You have to unlock your folder first, then only you can apply on project. So that's what, once I enable this, which is like, sorry, uncheck this and save it. Now that means my bucket is public. And if I simply go on the console, you will see a kind of a red annotation there against my bucket saying this is public. So now it is public in a true sense. And if I go here and refresh, here you go. So you have the website working. So do remember, whenever you see a word 403 as an error code, that means something is wrong with the permission of the bucket. Okay, so this is how you store an S3. This is how you host a static website. Upload your code, enable the static website, step 2. Third, apply the bucket permission, which applies on all the object level. Fourth, ensure that your bucket level permission is also public. And you can verify it by the access list, which has the red annotation calling that this is public, right? So that's about how you can handle and access, right? Again, you cannot apply security groups and other stuff. There is more sophisticated way with CloudFront and all. You can more secure it, which you will see in the upcoming slide, upcoming section, sessions what we'll have. But this is for now. You can have this way. You can store very simple or very complex static websites which doesn't need any dynamic content. You can easily store this way. So that's about S3 website. Moving towards next, cross, right? Sometimes there are different kinds of requests that comes up. A different domain, like for an example, instead of, for example, the request comes from example to kind of redirect or subdomain or different port or different protocol. Generally, it happens, right? People have stopped using HTTP nowadays. They have moved to HTTPS, right? So what happens is you redirect anyone coming from HTTP, you redirect to HTTPS, or you redirect on the port level. Someone comes, let's say, from 443 to 8080 internally, right, within the VPC. Those kinds of manipulation you keep doing on the request level. If you keep doing that, you need to ensure that you enable cross in case of S3, which is cross origin request. That means that even though request comes from a different domain, you redirect into a different domain, right? Cross is a very common error. Any guy on this call who's a software engineer, for sure in their entire career would have faced on the cross error, right? At the beginning, for sure. So the same applies. As I talk about when we are hosting the static website, you saw one more option was redirect. Redirect means S3 will act like a mediator. Any request that comes to S3 will get automatically redirect to another domain. In that case, you will see a common error. Cross is not enabled and redirect mechanism will not work. So do ensure if a request comes or originated from one domain for another domain, on a domain level, on a subdomain level, on a port level or protocol level, do ensure that you enable the cross. Otherwise, you start getting the cross errors. Next is a pre-signed URL. So certain times it happens, right? A person doesn't have an AWS access. Okay, very simple of it. You have a kind of a mobile application. Now you want to allow your end user to upload a file, to download a file. Now you cannot ask an end user that, okay, you log in first to your AWS console, and then you do it, right? So in that case, you can use something called as pre-signed URL. Pre-signed URL is simple like an authenticated link, right? So generally what we do when you're sharing any sort of Google Doc, you generate a pre-signed, right? A signed URL that anyone with that URL can access that document, right? Similar is the exact concept of pre-signed URL, that with help of pre-signed URL, you can get the object which is stored from S3, as well as you can put the object also, as shown in this image, right? First, you create a pre-signed URL, which can be done via CLI for the download. In order to get the object, you can easily do it via CLI. With the help of CLI, you generate the pre-signed URL on a specific object. So what you provide is the timeout and which object you want to generate the specific. No, it's not a folder level, it's a specific object, and how much is the expiry time you generate a pre-signed URL. Once you get the pre-signed URL for that specified time frame until it get expired, user can download the object multiple times. It can even download 100, 200 times same object until the URL is expired. So that's how pre-signed URL works for the get. Similarly, for put, you can use AWS SDK, as we learned about three ways, right? CLI, GUID, the user interface, and SDK. So with some programming language, software development kit, you can generate with help of Lambda or any Java program running in your laptop. You can generate a pre-signed URL with a post put kind of permission, right? With the same until expiry. So until expiry, user can click uploading the objects until the link is expired, right? And this all objects will store with the same name which has been defined while generating the put URL. So just remember, in short, pre-sign is a more secured way, a signed URL which allows you to put the object to get the object unless and until the link is expired. You can generate the pre-signed URL for get object via CLI. Similarly, for put object, you can generate the pre-signed URL via SDK. So this about is the pre-signed URL. Moving to the most important part when it comes to the cost optimization is the storage class, right? So in case of Amazon, Amazon S3 provides multiple storage class or multiple tiers, right? Anything, there are different kinds of storage class. When you're even traveling with, let's say, flight, train, you have a different storage class, right? Sleeping class you have, then you have an AC class, then you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, those kinds of stuff, right? Those are general stuff. Even in business class, you have in flights, business class, economic, premium economic. Similarly, in S3, there are different classes are provided, like S3 standard, intelligent tiering, S3 infrequent. Those kinds of different mechanisms are provided. The whole idea of providing this different storage classes, S3 wants to provide more flexibility to their customer. What kind of use case you have, what kind of data set you have, you apply and store that in that fashion for one thing. First, there is a kind of very cost effectiveness or cost efficiency what you can get because the data can scale up to petabytes, right? The simple example what we give, right? In generally, you have the government documents like ITR or any sorts of government. You have to save those documents for 7 years. So generally, when you apply an ITR, your CA, your chartered accountant, generates that ITR document. He needs to save that document for 7 years for auditing. One of the options he can do on-prem and other stuff. No shot, the hardware can corrupt another thing. The second option is you can take that file, you can put it into S3. Now you can put into S3 standard, you have to play the fed files, even if you're not accessing. This object are just for archival purpose, right? They may ask you, hey, can you give me of 2014 any file I need for auditing purpose, right? December 14. You never use your entire 7 years. One fine day someone comes up and say, I need the file in 1 week, right? But if you have standard, you pay that flat price, even though if you use it or not use it. That's why AWS come up with different tiers, different option. Based on the kind of use case, based on kind of the requirement, you can opt for any of the stuff. Like in case of compliances, you can store into like a Glacier. Glacier is like an archival policy, archival storage, which you can store and you can get the data around it, right? So there are certain pros and cons, but ensure that you wisely select the storage class because each storage class has a different data availability. Like someone can replicate your data between 2-3 availability zones. Someone can do it in one availability zone. Someone can retrieve the data with lower latency. Someone can need the data retrieval for a week or a couple of hours, right? So based on that, you need to ensure how sensitive your data is, when you will need your data, in what frequency you will need your data, and the cost. Based on these three things, you can decide around it, right? Is, let's say, for a simple example, you're working on a big data project. In that case, it's always recommended you go with the standard, because whenever you need the data, you need it, first of all, you need the data very frequently in a lower latency. Then standard is the default one, right? Then a new other things which has also come up, like intelligent tiering. Like if you don't know, let's say for example, I don't know how I'm going to use that data. I don't even know, it maybe I need it once in a week, it maybe I need like 10 times in a day, or maybe I don't even need for a month. So S3 intelligent tiering is smart enough that it automatically saves the cost. So you have to enable it, and based on how you are, what's a pattern of access is, S3 will intelligently will take care of it, right? So those kinds of simple to complex or smartness has been there in the storage class. Please ensure that to study in detail, you can follow this link which is in the presentation, which will help you to understand in detail how things work. And this is around the number grid, right? This looks very complex, like durability, availability, and those kinds of stuff. In general, as I mentioned, no one is going to ask you to learn this in detail. None of the interviews, none of the any exams, right? But you have to remember around it couple of things based on the type of data. How sensitive is your data, right? If your data is very sensitive in terms of you cannot lose that data, for sure you will try to make and store into the class where it provides 3 or more availability zone, right? For sure you won't store into one zone availability, because if that got lost, you're done. So those kinds of small detailing you have to do. No one is going to remember it is 11 nines or what. This is a simple way to remember. But one is around the availability part of it, that you have to ensure that how sensitive your data is. Two, you need to ensure the retrieval, right? When you need the data, how quickly you need the data. Is it you need in few seconds, you need in couple of hours, you need in couple of weeks? Those are the few things you need to watch out when you're selecting the right storage class. And again, if you need to look into detail, you can follow this link. They've given a very best example you can follow, and you can understand how these values are there. And again, this is the same annotation which I've got from Cloud Health website. They have given a very simple flow around it. How often do you access your storage, as I talk about, right? How often I access this data? Once in a month, then standard is the one. I'm not sure, as I mentioned, intelligent tiering, what you can use. Not sure, not very often. Once I'll storing it for at least 30 days. Then this is how you can decide across different flow chart. And based on that flow chart, you can come up with different other options. So this is, I got a very best representation from Cloud Health company, where you can decide what storage can work based on how you're going to access that data. And again, let's say you need that data for first 3 months, but after 3 months you realized I haven't used the data and it's no more required. It was that time that is a need when I need it, but now I don't need it. So you can have different kinds of life cycle transition actions or life cycle defined in S3, where you can move the data from standard to infrequent to intelligent tiering to one zone. So in this format of waterfall model, you can move the data across this class, right? It need not to be you have to follow like a waterfall, right? Like one after the another. As you can see, this arrow going from standard, you can directly put into glacier. So let's say generally chartered accountants, right? For an auditing period of first 6 months, they need that file. After 6 months, they don't know. They might need like in once in a year, twice in a year. So for first 6 months, you can keep into standard. After 6 months, you can define the lifecycle rule, which can directly move the data to glacier, like either in glacier or deep archival, which is an advanced glacier you can simply think of. So those kinds of automatic actions also you can define to save your cost, right? You can also manually trigger it, manually do it, but you can automatically also can take care of it. You can move it across the life cycle, right? Just in case if you haven't chosen the one at the first step, you can take care of that later. Then the performance, right? Generally, this is very important when you're working on any analytical use case, right? Like big data and other stuff. You need to ensure how frequently you can get the data, you upload the data, and those kinds of action that you do. Two functionalities are provided by AWS is multi-part upload. So as I mentioned, you can store up to 5 terabytes, like one object can be a 5 terabytes. Now we all know, even though if you have 1 GB of internet speed, it's very difficult to upload 5 terabytes in one part, right? One single part. So multi-part is you chunk down into different parts. Based on the different parts, you try to make it. So it is recommended from AWS, any file which is more than 100 MB, right? Or 100 MB or somewhere around it, or 5 GB, you should use a multi-part around it, right? So more, I mean, you have to ensure that if it goes to somewhere around GBs, then you use multipart. You unnecessarily for even like 5 MB of data, don't do multipart. It will give you a degradation in performance, not the improvisation. So that's about multipart, and the advantage of multipart is the same. You can parallelize, upload, and speed up your transfer because S3 is highly concurrently scalable. So that's about multipart. The last one is the S3 transfer accelerator, right? Let's say I'm sitting in AP South, which is in Mumbai region. My client is in North Virginia, which is US East, and I want to send a file in North Virginia. One option is always simple. I can go a direct route. Like I can sit here, go and upload it, right? Which is fine up to if it is like even 5 GB of data, it's fine. If it is 5 terabytes of data, I'm going to take whole amount of time, like almost like good amount of time. And again, if internet link broke, unstable, everything, I have to start from scratch. So what you can do is you can use S3 transfer accelerator where you can upload to CloudFront edge location from your location, which can be nearby. As I talk about, edge locations are all over the place. And from edge location, there is an optimized network path, which will be transferring your file from the edge location to North Virginia or any regional cross-region bucket where you want to do. That also is another there. On an average, there is a performance comparison done by AWS in one of the blog. It saves somewhere between 13 to 18% of performance efficiency you get if you use this route of transfer acceleration compared to the direct. 18% is also good when you have multiple files, right? If I talk about 15, 20 files, 5 terabytes, 18% with, I mean, any range between 13 to 18% make more impact there. S3 Select and Glacier. Again, you can do S3 Select, right? You have any files in CSV, you need particular row. You don't need to download the entire file. You can query that data live there without any CPU, without any sorts of stuff. Very basic SQL. You can easily query that data and you can take care of that thing, right? Athena, I will show you the demonstration of S3 Select and Athena very soon after this slide. If we talk about next, Athena is like, you can simple what people generally define as a serverless warehouse. S3 Select, as I mentioned about, you have one file, you can query specific files, right? Select, you can do only select. Athena is more sophisticated for analytical use case, right? As you can see in the diagram, you have Athena, you can query the data sitting in S3, right? As well as you can query other data which is stored in any other databases with help of Lambda, right? Federated queries, what we call as. With help of this connector, you can reach out to any other source also. Athena is very useful as a serverless. When you talk about serverless, Lambda for sure is very renowned in the market. If you look on the data side perspective, Athena comes like the second best service when you talk about this serverless. You don't have to worry about spinning an EC2 instance. You don't have to worry about optimizing in terms of the hardware and all, right? Not have to take care of the networking all. It's completely managed service. You have to ensure that your data is properly partitioned, compressed, and optimized. And then you can query the data sitting in S3, which may be from GBs to hundreds of GBs to terabytes. You can easily query the data if you have proper compression, proper partition, and best practice of dealing around it. Athena works on a distributed engine called as Presto. So Presto is an distributed engine, DB engine, on which Athena has been developed, right? And Presto works pretty well when you talk about Parquet. So always remember that as a thumb rule. Whenever you're working on very large frequency of data, like big data and those kinds of problem you're trying to solve, and you're using Athena, just close your eyes, implement, and go with Parquet. Parquet with compression will give you best optimal reasons. And there are other formats are also there, like you can have CSV, you can have ORC, Ebro, and Parquet. But with help of Presto works very fine with Parquet, which is a columnar format. And then you can implement index and compression on top of it, which will give you the best scanning results because Athena works on $5 per terabytes kind of a logic, right? So if you scroll, let's say 5 terabytes of data, it will charge you, let's say 5 into 5, 25, right? So this is how Athena works behind the scene. So somewhere you have to watch out that it's not about how many number of rows you have scanned, it's number of data size. So the more you compress your data, it will give you optimal performance in the time, as well as it will save your cost, right? Cost in terms of you can query the same data set as a compressed version with a better performance and lower cost. So for sure you will go for that, right? So that's the best thing you have to watch out. There are many people who keep complaining about Athena not working out and all. The common mistake I have seen or experienced across different customers is if the data may not be properly indexed, the data may not be properly compressed, or data format may not be right, or the queries may not be right. Certain times the people don't have the proper join keys and those things are being used. So there are a couple of small issues are there, but if you take care of proper using Parquet format, compression, proper indexing, you will get a very efficient result with Athena without worrying about any sorts of infrastructure or any sorts of um, complexities of maintaining, upscaling the hardware and other thing, right? So before we go to the S3 notification, let me switch to my AWS console and we can quickly go through a demo. So this is the bucket which I've created. And this is a CSV file which I have stored. What I'll do is first we'll go and understand what is S3 select is. So this is, I've simply just gone through my bucket where my CSV file is on a specific CSV file. Okay. I click on object action, query with S3 select. Here I have to select the right, it give me size. I have to select the right format, which is CSV, JSON or Parquet. As you can see, it also supports Parquet. Then you provide, okay, what kind, comma separated, tab separated, custom. You can skip the first line, right? That it's a header. Then you can have the compression of it. You can either compress your data, is it compressed or not? Those all kinds of stuff is there. And the output, whether you want to have an output, CSV or what kind of thing. And then you can finally run the query. Very simple of it. You don't even, I mean, if you are like having very SQL knowledge, no code, nothing, like very simple SQL query, and you can get the output in of this format. You can have the format and other stuff, right? And the results are like in milliseconds what you're getting without any sorts of infrastructure, any sorts of time taken to launch the server and all, right? But the only limitation what you get in S3 is this is very peculiar, right? If you need one file, you want to query that without, you don't want to download the larger file, you just want to query a couple of rows in it. You can do where condition and those kinds of stuff also. But if you want to just filter out a couple of rows, then S3 select is the best thing which you can do without worrying about all the partition and everything, right? On specific one file. But if you have, let's say, 5, 10, 15, 100 millions of files, and you want to do more analytical, broader use case, then always go for Athena. And Athena doesn't work on, I mean, for sure it works on one file, but it works on a folder level. So any number of files what you have in the folder, you can easily pick that up. So for Athena, what you have to do is just go on. And again, this is a sample CSV which I mean, it was from my end. If you have some more complex CSVs also, you can pick up of any data set. It needs to be very simpler. You can have like a 50, 60 column kind of CSV also uploaded in S3, right? But do watch out, it only has like a CSV, JSON or Parquet. So this is how your entire Athena console looks like. By the way, it is a brand new console what AWS has released, which is very neat and look like you're working on some workbench, some SQL or MySQL workbench. It looks very neat and clean. So you can easily identify, you can just see like you can identify what queries have been done and other stuff, right? As I tried a couple of dry runs, you can see easily around that you have this things which were fired around it. If I would have saved any queries for frequent, if you have the frequent queries, right? Some ad hoc queries, you can save. You can also do a setting kind of thing, right? The setting in terms of where exactly you want to save the output, right? For an example, what I can do is, this is my Athena session, right? So you can save. So any result which got generated by Athena, like any CSV, any output, metadata file, all will get saved into one S3 location. So you can refer it at the later, right? Certain times what I have seen people do is they query the data scheduled on a schedule basis. And at the last, based on the output file name, they can query the data also. So in an asynchronous fashion. So if you go back to our console, here you can select, you can create different database, right? If not, then you can use a simple SQL like kind of a stuff, right? What I'll do is I'll go back and under Athena, I've already have a so this is my wait, if I copy here, this is exactly if someone is coming from a SQL background, you will see this is exact what you do. You create like a table, right? Here we are saying an external table, but you're creating a simple table where you define number of columns, data type around it, then you specify the driver which you want to do. You provide the location around it as well as a couple of table properties. Like I'm skipping the header, the first row, and all that. Like almost SQL like kind of a query what you do, and when you run this, it is completed, and you can see the table is there, and I can easily review the table. You can see on the same frequency what we got like in the S3 select, like somewhere in milliseconds, even less than that, you got this entire output. You can do most other complex stuff also, right? This is a very simple select statement what I have done for 10 rows, right? Similarly, how we have done for S3 select, you can do more broader complex use cases like joins across different two tables in the same database. You can connect Athena with QuickSight, which is BI tool, and you can do more complex analytical workload here, right? So that's how S3 select works on a specific file level. Athena can work on multiple bunch of files and can give you broader complex analytical use cases. And it's built on the Presto engine, which is the distributed DB engine. So that's about S3 Select and Athena. Moving towards the next one, which we have learned in the first slide also, event notification, right? Anytime whenever a person perform any action, whether it's on the bucket, whether it's on the object, you can orchestrate a kind of an event notification, right? That event notification can be sent to SQS, can be sent to SNS, or it can be sent to Lambda function, and then you can orchestrate lots of kind of stuff, right? I mean, you can send a notification around it, you can orchestrate, or you can just process that stuff, right? Very common example you would have seen, like when you do an S3 event, right, on the Google. Generally, a common standard what I've seen from 2015 is a thumbnail example. You upload an image into S3 bucket, then a Lambda will generate, and then Lambda will just create a thumbnail of an image, and then you will see an output store in the another bucket. Those kinds of complex, from simple to complex kinds of use case we were done, right? In industry, like if I talk about big data or any other industry, generally I've seen what the people do is they trigger their ETL pipeline also. So whenever they get the data from their external data provider, anytime, right, mid of the night or any time of the clock, they have certain step function, glue, those kinds of things triggered, integrated with help of event notification. And as soon as the file lands in the S3 bucket, you can trigger or you can just orchestrate any of the downstream processing. So this way you don't have to wait or like look out for files every hour. As and when it just lands in a fraction of a second, your pipeline triggers, you process it, stores it, or you can just validate your file also, right? Like, okay, the file which got uploaded, from a quality perspective, is it good, is it bad? If not, then you can immediately respond it back to your system, to your team, that okay, no, the file uploaded was corrupted or it's not matching the format. Those kinds of complex thing also you can do around with the stuff, right? The important part of S3 notification is, which generally people miss out, is you can filter. It's not like, as we talk about like versioning, right? The versioning imply on the bucket level. S3 notification is not that the case. S3 notification can be applied on a specific file format type. It can be applied on a specific folder, like the prefix. So do ensure that you can for sure apply on a bucket level. But if you have a specific use case, always try to minimize the area, the surface area, right? Either you apply on a specific file format or you apply on a specific folder, not on the bucket level. It will unnecessarily keep triggering your pipeline, which will incur the cost. So do ensure that you filter out and you apply on prefix or suffix of the key name, like the extension, and you can take it. And for the various other events, what you can do is whenever new objects get created, it's removed, restored, or any replication event, right? Those are the different other options, like sample of it, what you can take care of the stuff when it comes to the S3 part of it, right? So that's what we learned from today's session. If I quickly recap what we have gone through in detail. So we understand about what is S3, how exactly it's stored in a form of a bucket and directory. Then we understood in what is bucket, what is object, the naming convention of buckets, versioning, how we can have the backup copies for versioning, how we can do replications, encryption, which is very important for your certification as well as the real life experience, right? In IT industry also, encryption is very important around it. What different types of it, bucket policy, how we can secure your buckets and the objects stored in it, how you can host a static website. We had a demo around it. Then how exactly generally you can solve the cross issues with help of S3, pre-signed URL, the signed secured URL via which you can allow the user to upload the object or to download the object based within the expiry time. Storage class, how we can get more optimized way of, cost effective way as well as more optimized way of getting the data. Again, please ensure based on the sensitivity of data and importance of it, based on the availability zone you choose, as well as the kind of retrieval rates, like you want it very quickly in few seconds or few weeks, few days. Based on that, you can decide the storage class. And this is a kind of a flow chart which will help you to do the same. And let's say in case if you don't know at the beginning what kind of storage class you want to do, then you can apply the life cycle after a defined frequency of 30 days, 90 days, 60 days, where you can automatically move the data from one storage class to the lower storage class. The first one will be cost expensive and the last one will be the less expensive, right? In this waterfall or staircase model. Then we understand how you can improvise the performance with multi-part upload and S3 transfer accelerators. We perform a quick demo of S3 Select. The similarly is on what you can do on the file store in a Glacier Select. We understood how Athena and S3 Select differs, where exactly Athena works well, where exactly S3 Select will be fine use case. Then we went in detail about event notification, how we can capture different action and do more intelligent tracking of objects. And then the last piece of the today's session is the next step, right? So we had a wonderful journey last 2 days for this first week. I saw like many interaction, many people were reaching out to me on LinkedIn. They want to understand in detail what we will have next about the slides. Many people even registered themselves with the link, the Google form. Still, I see many people are interested to opt for the certification. Please opt for it. The certification is meant from the beginner to the experienced guys. We have the link of that Google form. Please register yourself. We'll have a platform link which will help you to get the materials, chat with the experts. Those kinds of functionality will provide there. And for the next week, next session will be on AWS compute services. What are the different compute services provided by Amazon? We'll have that topic on Saturday, 18th of December, and on 19th of December, which is Sunday, next day, we'll have all the serverless services around it. So that's what we have for you for the second week of our bootcamp. And that's all from this week and this particular session. Just want to call out the different organizers and volunteers who helped, worked in and out to get the session, to promote the session and reach out to other people, helping us to create the interaction platform and all. It's not possible without these people and volunteers, and as well as the supportive user groups, user group Dehradun, Hyderabad, Indore, Nasik, Rajkot, and Ranchi. Sincere kudos to the organizing team as well as the supportive user group. That's what we'll have from today's session. I appreciate, thank you so much for everyone to join the session in the Sunday afternoon from your busy weekend schedule, and hope I see that same participations coming out in upcoming sessions also. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you very much, Sanchit. And I hope everyone did enjoy the session on the deep dive on S3. And like Sanchit said, we have more activities coming up next weekend. So please make sure that you register on the link that is there in the description. And we'll see you all next week. And have a good week ahead.